My psychopath sister and her boyfriend broke into my home and stole everything from me, so I totally ruined their life. I got a call from a hospital overseas saying my 18-year-old daughter was hit by a drunk driver and had gone into a coma, so I immediately got the first flight over to be by her side. I was at my daughter's bedside for weeks, and somehow my sister, a diagnosed sociopath, found out that I wasn't home. She took this as the perfect opportunity for her and her ex-convict boyfriend to break into my house through the back door, and once inside, they rummaged through. They left no stone unturned, stealing all of my precious jewelry, my $2,000 camera I used for my photography, and as a cherry on top, took all of the money out of the childhood piggy bank that my daughter owned. The day I flew back with my daughter, I noticed that things were missing. I walked throughout the house to find that whoever it was had rummaged through drawers in my closets. They took anything of value: jewelry, electronics, my cash. Nothing was off limits. I broke down crying. I had already been put in dire financial straits, and now this. I checked the cameras to find out who it was, and when I saw it was my sister, I grabbed my phone to call the police. The thing about my sister Sarah was, she was a nutcaswee to say the least. For some context, we were about 10 and 12. Our parents had left us alone for the evening, trusting that I could keep things under control. Sarah had a different idea. She had found our dad's stash of fireworks in the garage for the 4th of July and was determined to set them off. It was September. She tried to convince me to join her, saying that it would be fun and that they wouldn't even know. I told her it was a bad idea, especially since mom and dad had left me in charge. I told her that we would get in a lot of trouble. Against my better judgment, I let her go to the garage and light the fireworks. I sat in the living room watching TV when I heard a loud boom come from the garage. I ran to the garage and saw as she was running towards me. Just one firework had multiple different fireworks bursting out of it. The smoke filled the garage. I snatched her in the house and slammed the garage door closed. We waited until the rest of the fireworks went off in the garage, not sure of the damage done. Sarah had a grin from ear to ear. She screamed, "That was totally wicked!" Her fun was short-lived. The neighbors called our parents, who rushed home in a panic. I knew we were in for it. But before I could say anything, Sarah spoke up and said she was innocent, and it was all my idea. She claimed I made her do it. I stood there, stunned and speechless. Sarah's lies were so convincing that our parents believed her. I took the blame and was grounded for a month while Sarah got off with a stern warning. That's the kind of person she was, and still is. So when the police arrived, they took my statement and told me they would search for them. The next day, I got a huge surprise, as Sarah showed up at my door begging for forgiveness. She cried and grabbed my hand. She said that we were family, and that she didn't mean for it to go this far. She always pulled this trick. She would act like she was so sorry when she was caught, and promised that it would never happen again. But the same cycle would repeat not even weeks later. I felt so betrayed and knew I couldn't let this slide. For some dumb reason, however, later that day when I was alone, I thought about forgiveness, and that if I refused to press charges against Sarah, she would truly understand. And so that's what I did. I let Sarah off the hook, but not Jake. Speaking of Jake, the police quickly arrested him, who had several outstanding warrants. The case went to court, and with the clear evidence against him, I won easily. Jake was sentenced to jail, and I hoped that would be the end of it. I thought that Sarah would appreciate what I did for her, and that this was the one time in her life she would actually understand how lucky she was not to have to face consequences. However, just like Christian, who denounced his faith, I came to regret ever turning the other cheek. Sarah's anger and resentment towards me grew each day. She blamed me for Jake's imprisonment and vowed to make me pay. What started as petty online harassment soon escalated into a full-blown one-sided war. One morning, I stepped out to get the newspaper and noticed my neighbors giving me strange looks. The woman who lived next door avoided eye contact and hurried back into her house. I shrugged it off until later that day when I received a call from another neighbor. He said that my sister had been going around calling the neighbors about me mistreating my daughter. He said that she was the one that had to help her while she was in the hospital, while I would leave the house to go be with men. She said I would often neglect her and ask her to come watch her at the hospital so I could have freedom. Nada. My neighbors all knew that my daughter was in the hospital because of the accident, and I thought they knew I was literally in a different country with her. But apparently not. I was stunned. Sarah's lies were ruining my reputation in the neighborhood. A few days later, my car was vandalized. The tires were slashed and the paint was scratched with curse words. I stood there staring at the damage. I couldn't decide if I felt angry or helpless. I knew it was Sarah, but without proof, there wasn't much I could do. The harassment continued. I started finding threatening notes left on my doorstep. The first one was simple but chilling. "You'll regret this." Each note that followed was more sinister and personal. "You can't hide," one read. Another said, "You'll pay for your mistakes." I started to feel unsafe in my own home. I couldn't sleep. I constantly listened for any sign of Sarah in my house. The nights were the worst. Every creak in the house set me on edge. I installed security cameras and changed the locks, but I was still worried. One evening, I heard a noise outside and rushed to the window. There I saw Sarah, her face twisted with anger. She was trying to smash the windows of my living room. I called the police immediately, but by the time they arrived, she was gone. Every day I feared what Sarah would do next. The police were sympathetic, but said their hands were tied without concrete evidence. All I could do was document everything and hope it would be enough to put a stop to her madness. Not only was she harassing me in my home, she would harass me outside my home. She would call me at all hours of the day, and since I didn't respond, she would leave nasty voicemails and text me threatening messages from a random phone number app. Sarah's harassment had reached a new height one night when she set a fire in my garage. The flames roared to life and started to consume my house. This lady was trying to unalive me. I woke up to the smell of smoke and the sound of sirens. I ran downstairs to see what started it, and as I got to the garage, I saw Sarah running back to her car and speeding off. I could see through her window a huge huge grin spread across her face, the same one I saw that night she set off fireworks in our garage. The fire department arrived just in time to prevent the fire from spreading to the entire house. I gave the police the footage from my security cameras, showing Sarah committing the arson. This time, the evidence was undeniable. Sarah was arrested and charged with multiple crimes, including arson, harassment, and breaking and entering. The trial was swift, and Sarah was found guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to several years in jail. With Sarah and her boyfriend behind bars, I finally felt a sense of relief. However, I couldn't shake the sadness and betrayal that lingered in my heart. My own sister had turned against me in the most vicious way imaginable. It was a wound that I knew would take a long time to heal. I visited Sarah in jail, hoping to understand what was the reason behind all this. During our conversation, it became clear that Sarah's actions were not just the result of jealousy and anger. She was deeply mentally ill. I already knew she was suffering from antisocial personality disorder, but how she acted towards me must have been more. Her inability to empathize or feel remorse had enabled her destructive behavior. Tears formed in her eyes as she told me that she never wanted things to end up like this. Even though she seemed genuine, I couldn't help but feel like this was the same Sarah who cried to me every time she got caught and would say anything to get out of a pickle. I left the jail with a heavy heart. I realized that I might never have the sisterly bond that I'd always wanted, but I also knew that I had done the right thing by standing up for myself and protecting my daughter. As time passed, my daughter Ella's condition was up in the air. I didn't mention this at the time, but she went to stay with my best friend for the time being because I never wanted her to potentially have to deal with Sarah herself. She had severe brain damage from the coma for a long time, and even after my sister had been imprisoned, I didn't have the heart to tell Ella everything and said she should just focus on recovering at the moment. She knew roughly what was going on, but I tried my best not to overwhelm her with information. But the day I was able to bring her back home knowing Sarah was behind bars, I was beyond grateful. For the first time in what felt like forever, the future seemed a little brighter. But then, just as I thought things were looking up and as I helped Ella settle into her room, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, and for a moment I considered letting it go to voicemail, but something compelled me to answer. I answered the phone and heard a lot of people in the background. The person on the other line called my name. It was Jake, Sarah's boyfriend. A chill ran down my spine. I couldn't understand why he would be calling me. I asked him what he wanted, and he said that he needed to tell me something important about Sarah. He said that he knew from the beginning the plans she had for me. She said she'd been planning this for years. She wanted to ruin me, and he claimed he had proof. He then said that he could testify against her, but he needed something in return. He needed help with lowering his sentence. I knew then that he had been out of the loop for too long, and he was trying to use me like a pawn. I told him she was already in jail and that his little plan to get out of jail faster wasn't going to work. He said that he could make sure that me and Ella would be safe from her forever with the evidence he had. We didn't have to deal with him or her anymore, and that conversation wasn't serving me. I said goodbye. He cursed me and hung up the phone. I looked over at Ella, who was resting peacefully, oblivious to everything. My mind was racing. As much as I hated the idea, Jake's offer was tempting. If what he said was true, Sarah's actions were premeditated, and her vendetta was far from over. I needed to protect my family, and if that meant working with Jake, would it be worth it? As the days passed, Jake's offer lived rent-free in my mind. I decided to follow my instincts and not take his offer. Instead, I began my own investigation. I reached out to an old friend, someone who had helped me during the initial phases of Sarah's harassment. A few days later, Mark contacted me with some news. He had been digging into Jake's background and his activities while he was in jail. It turned out Jake had been involved in some shady dealings even from behind bars. He had been manipulating the situation to his advantage and maintaining contact with some of his old associates. The evidence showed that he was trying to set me up. If I had taken his offer, I would have walked into a trap. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I realized the extent of Jakey's intentions. He had been plotting to frame me for additional crimes that Sarah had planned. Even behind bars, they were a dangerous duo. The plan involved pinning the blame on me, making it look like I was the mastermind behind some of Sarah's actions. Mark provided me with a folder filled with documents and transcripts of the conversations between Jake and his associates. He had been using me as a pawn, trying to save his own skin by throwing me under the bus. With this new information, I decided to confront Jake. I visited the prison and demanded to see him. As I sat across from Jake, I laid out the evidence I had found. His initial smirk faded, replaced by a look of surprise and anger as he realized his plan had been exposed. The authorities were now aware of his attempt to frame me and added more time to his sentence. The battle wasn't over, but I was more prepared than ever to face whatever came next. My focus now was on rebuilding my life and creating a safe environment for Ella. With Sarah and Jake incarcerated, life slowly began to return to normal, but the scars of the past events lingered. I took additional steps to ensure our safety, reinforcing the security system and joining a neighborhood watch. I also sought counseling to cope with the emotional toll of the betrayal and harassment. Through therapy, I found ways to process my feelings and regain a sense of normalcy. Ella's recovery was nothing but a miracle. Though she had a long way to go, her spirit remained unbroken. Her strength was the reason I woke up in the morning and was my motivation to keep going even on the hard days. We celebrated each milestone, no matter how small, and found joy in the simple moments that we had once taken for granted.